They say success tastes sweetest when it's seasoned with vindication. I learned that lesson over rosemary-crusted lamb chops and the shocked expressions of 40 dinner guests who thought they were attending my parents' anniversary celebration. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Celeste Morrison, and until 3 months ago, my parents introduced me at parties as our daughter who works in hospitality, their polite way of saying I was just a waitress. What they didn't know was that at 23 years old, I had just closed the deal that would make me the youngest restaurant owner in Chicago's history. This is the story of how I built an empire in secret and how one television broadcast changed everything. Part 1, The Disappointment Dinner, December 2022. Celeste is still figuring things out, my mother, Patricia Morrison, told her book club friends as I served them finger sandwiches in our family's Evanston living room. I was 21 years old and I had just dropped out of Northwestern Law School, a decision that had sent shockwaves through my achievement-obsessed family. My father, Richard Morrison, a senior partner at Morrison & Associates, couldn't even look at me that day. My older brother, Trevor, had graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School. My younger sister, Vivian, was already making waves as a junior analyst at Goldman Sachs at 19. And then there was me, the middle child who had thrown away a full scholarship to chase what my father called a pipe dream. Law school isn't for everyone, Patricia continued, her voice dripping with forced cheerfulness. She's working at a restaurant downtown. Very, character building. What she didn't mention was which restaurant. She didn't know the name. She'd never asked. I was working at Marcello's, an Italian bistro in Lincoln Park owned by an elderly couple, Giuseppe and Maria Lombardi. The place had history. It had been open since 1987, but it was drowning in debt, outdated decor, and a menu that hadn't changed since the Clinton administration. I wasn't just a waitress there, though that's what I let my parents believe. I was Giuseppe's protege, learning everything from inventory management to recipe costing, from vendor negotiations to the art of perfect pasta dough. More importantly, I was learning what it took to save a dying restaurant. Part 2, The Education of a Waitress, January 2023 to December 2023. Giuseppe Lombardi was 74 years old when I started working at Marcello's in January 2023. He had weathered every storm Chicago could throw at a restaurant owner. The recession of 2008, the pandemic, changing food trends, and the exodus of diners to suburban ghost kitchens. But time was his enemy now. His arthritis made it difficult to work the line, and Maria's health was declining. "You remind me of myself at your age," Giuseppe told me one February evening after service. We were sitting in the empty dining room, and he was teaching me how to read a P&L statement. "I'm tracing the numbers with my finger." He replied, "Parents always think they know best. My father wanted me to be a doctor. Instead, I became a cook. He didn't speak to me for 2 years. But you know what? On his deathbed, he told me my ossobuco was the best medicine he ever had." Giuseppe became my mentor, my surrogate grandfather, and eventually my business partner. He saw something in me that my own parents couldn't, or wouldn't. While I served tables and smiled at customers, I was also rewriting the restaurant's business plan, researching food cost percentages, studying successful restaurant turnarounds, and learning the brutal economics of the hospitality industry. By June 2023, I had convinced Giuseppe to let me test new menu items on slower nights. My pan-seared scallops with lemon beurre blanc became a word-of-mouth sensation. My deconstructed tiramisu was Instagrammed by a local food blogger and went viral. Slowly, Marcello's was starting to fill up again. "You have the gift," Giuseppe said one night in September. "You have the gift of making people feel like they're eating in someone's home, but better. That's what great restaurants do. They make magic out of butter and flour and time." Part 3, The Proposition, October 2023. Giuseppe and Maria called me into their small office on a rainy October evening. Maria had been crying. I could see the tissue crumbled in her hand. "We have to sell," Giuseppe said without preamble. "Maria needs treatment in Italy. The doctors there, they specialized in her condition. We leave in November." My heart sank. Sell to who? "There's a developer who wants to turn this into luxury condos. He's offering $800,000. I did the math in my head. The building alone was worth more than that, and the business, with its newly renovated reputation, was finally profitable again. "Don't sell to him," I said. "Sell to me." They both stared at me. "Celeste, you're a wonderful girl, but," Giuseppe started. "I have $50,000 saved. It's every penny I've made from waitressing, birthday money I'd hoarded since childhood, and a small inheritance from my grandmother. I can get an SBA loan for the rest. I've been researching this for months. I have a business plan, I have projections, I have—" "You have courage," Giuseppe said quietly. "But do you have support? What do your parents say?" I hesitated. "They don't know, and they won't. Not yet." Maria and Giuseppe exchanged a long look, the kind that only couples married for 52 years can share, an entire conversation in a glance. "If you can get the financing," Giuseppe finally said, "we'll sell to you for $750,000, and we'll carry $100,000 of that ourselves, payable over 5 years. But Celeste, this will consume your life. Are you ready for that?" I didn't hesitate. I was born ready. Part 4. Building an Empire in Secret, November 2023 to June 2024. Getting the loan was harder than any law school exam I'd ever taken. I met with 7 banks before I found one willing to take a chance on a 22-year-old first-time restaurant owner. The key was my business plan, a 147-page document I'd been refining for 8 months, complete with market analysis, competitive positioning, growth projections, and detailed operational procedures. The loan officer, a woman named Sharon Peters at Fifth Third Bank, later told me she'd never seen such thorough preparation from someone my age. She said, "Most young people come in here with a dream and a Pinterest board. You came in here with a doctoral thesis." On December 15, 2023, I signed the papers that made me the owner of Marcello's. Giuseppe and Maria left for Italy the next week, tearful but hopeful. And I began the most intense period of my life. I worked 18-hour days. I was chef, manager, bookkeeper, marketer, and yes, still a waitress. I hired a small team of trusted staff. Miguel, a line cook with 20 years of experience, Amber, a server who understood the art of hospitality, and James, a dishwasher with dreams of becoming a chef. At home, I told my parents I was still working at that restaurant. They didn't ask questions. My father was busy with a major corporate merger. My mother was planning a fundraising gala. Vivian was climbing the corporate ladder. Trevor was completing his residency. Nobody had time to pay attention to the family disappointment. In January 2024, I soft-launched a weekend brunch menu that featured my grandmother's buttermilk pancakes and a shakshuka recipe I'd perfected. Chicago Magazine's food critic happened to be there on opening day. His review called it a revelation, comfort food elevated to art. Business exploded. By March, we were booked solid 6 days a week. I hired more staff. I expanded the wine list. I started hosting wine pairing dinners and cooking classes. The revenue doubled, then tripled. In April, I did something crazy. I signed a lease on a second location. The space was in West Loop, Chicago's hottest dining district, in a beautiful, exposed brick building that had once been a printing press. I called it Morrison's, after my grandmother Eleanor, the woman who had first taught me to cook and who had believed in me when no one else did. Morrison's was my vision from the ground up, a modern American bistro with a constantly changing seasonal menu, an open kitchen, and a bar program that featured craft cocktails infused with house-made ingredients. I hired a talented young chef named Derek Santos to run the kitchen while I split time between both locations. My parents still had no idea. When my mother called to ask why I couldn't make it to Trevor's engagement party, I told her I had to work a double shift. She sighed heavily. Celeste, you're 23 years old. When are you going to take your life seriously? If only she knew.
Part 5. The Television Call. July 2024. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing invoices at Morrison's. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. When you own restaurants, every call could be important. "Is this Celeste Morrison?" a professional female voice asked. "Speaking?" "This is Rachel Winters from WGN News. We're doing a feature on young entrepreneurs in Chicago, and your name came up in our research. We'd love to interview you about being the youngest restaurant owner in the city. Would you be interested?" My heart stopped. "I'm sorry, where did you get this information?" "Our business correspondent noticed you filed incorporation papers for 2 restaurants earlier this year, Morrison's and Marcello's Bistro, both under your name, correct? At 23, that makes you the youngest restaurant owner on record in Chicago's history. We think it's an incredible story." After I hung up, I sat in my empty restaurant and started laughing, then crying, then laughing again. The interview was scheduled for August 15th, 2024. They wanted to film both locations and talk about my journey from law school dropout to restaurant owner. They wanted the full story. I had 3 weeks to tell my parents. Part 6. The Anniversary Surprise. August 10th, 2024. I planned it carefully. My parents' 35th wedding anniversary was August 10th, and my mother had arranged a dinner party at their country club with 40 of their closest friends and family members. I convinced her to move the celebration to Morrison's instead. "It's the new place everyone's talking about. I can get you a reservation. It's impossible to book otherwise. My boss said he'd make an exception for you." My mother was intrigued, despite herself. "I've heard about Morrison's. Martha Harrison went last week and couldn't stop raving about it. But are you sure your employer won't mind?" "I'm sure," I said, swallowing a smile. The night of August 10th, I prepared a special tasting menu, 7 courses of my best dishes paired with wines I'd personally selected. My staff was in on the secret, excited and nervous in equal measure. My family arrived first. My father, still in his suit from the office, my mother, elegant in navy silk, Trevor and his fiancée Jessica, Vivian, looking up from her phone long enough to compliment the decor. None of them recognized the surroundings as mine. As guests arrived, I stayed in the kitchen, watching through the expediting window. I could hear my mother's voice. "Yes, Celeste is supposed to be working tonight, but she said she'd try to stop by later. She's still waiting tables at that little Italian place." At 8 p.m., after the main course, I walked out of the kitchen in my chef's whites. The confused silence was delicious. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Thank you all for coming to Morrison's tonight to celebrate my parents' anniversary. In case you're wondering, yes, I'm Celeste, and no, I'm not just here working a shift." I turned to my parents, who looked completely bewildered. "Mom, Dad, I'm not just figuring things out. I own this restaurant, and Marcello's. I've owned them both for 8 months. I'm the youngest restaurant owner in Chicago's history, and on Thursday, WGN News is doing a feature about me and my businesses." The silence stretched like taffy. Then Vivian started clapping, slowly at first, then enthusiastically. "Holy shit, Celeste," she breathed. "Holy shit." The room erupted. Friends rushed forward with questions and congratulations. Trevor grabbed me in a bear hug. My mother burst into tears, whether from shock, pride, or embarrassment. I couldn't tell. My father just sat there, staring at me. Finally, he stood up and walked over. I braced myself for anger, for disappointment, for another lecture about throwing away my potential. Instead, he said, "Can I see your books?" Part 7. The Morning After. August 11th, 2024. My father arrived at Morrison's at 6 a.m. and next morning carrying his briefcase. I was already there, prepping for the day, but I led him to my small office where I kept meticulous records of every transaction, every vendor relationship, every staffing decision, every marketing investment. For 3 hours, he reviewed everything: my SBA loan documents, my P&L statements, my business plans for both restaurants, my 5-year growth projections, my expansion ideas, every spreadsheet, every contract, every receipt. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. He asked, "You did this all alone?" I learned from Giuseppe. A loan officer named Sharon took a chance on me. My staff believed in me. But yes, I built this. He removed his reading glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Celeste, I owe you an apology. Several apologies. Maybe 35 years worth." "Dad." "No, let me finish." He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the Chicago River. He turned to face me. "When you dropped out of law school, I thought you were giving up. I thought you were afraid of hard work, afraid of commitment. I was so disappointed that I couldn't see what was actually happening." He turned to face me. "You weren't running away from something. You were running toward something, and you did it brilliantly. These restaurants, Celeste, these financials are better than most established businesses I review. Your profit margins, your cost controls, your growth rate. You're not just running restaurants, you're running an empire." "I learned from the best," I said softly. "You taught me about numbers, about contracts, about negotiation. Mom taught me about presentation and people management. You both gave me the tools. I just used them differently than you expected." We stood there in my office as the sun rose over Chicago, father and daughter, finally seeing each other clearly. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked. "Because I needed to prove it to myself first, and maybe I needed to prove it to you too. I needed you to see me as more than your disappointment." "You were never my disappointment," he said fiercely. "You were my fear. I was afraid you'd fail, and I didn't know how to support you through that. So instead of cheering you on, I criticized your choices. I'm sorry, Celeste. I'm so sorry." Part 8, The Feature. August 15th, 2024. The WGN news feature aired on a Thursday evening. Rachel Winters had done her homework, interviewing not just me but also Giuseppe via video call from Italy, Sharon from the bank, several of my regular customers, and even my former law school classmates who remembered me as that girl who talked about restaurants more than torts. The segment was titled "From Law Books to Cookbooks: How Celeste Morrison Built Chicago's Youngest Restaurant Empire." It showed me working both locations, tasting dishes, mentoring my staff, and talking about my philosophy: food brings people together in ways that nothing else can. When someone sits down at one of my restaurants, I want them to feel welcomed, seen, and cared for. That's not just hospitality, that's humanity. The feature showed my parents in the audience at Morrison's, my mother crying with pride, my father looking at me with something I'd never seen before: unqualified respect. The day after it aired, both restaurants were booked solid for the next 3 months. My Instagram following went from 2,000 to 45,000 overnight. I got calls from investors, from food networks, from other young entrepreneurs asking for advice. Forbes reached out about featuring me in their 30 Under 30 issue. Bon Appetit wanted to do a profile. The Small Business Administration asked me to speak at a conference about entrepreneurship. But the moment that meant the most came 3 days after the broadcast, when my mother called me, crying. "I've been telling everyone, Martha Harrison, the book club, the Garden Society, everyone. I tell them my daughter is a restaurant owner, my brilliant, brave daughter who built an empire. Celeste, I'm so proud of you, and I'm so sorry it took me this long to say it." Part 9, Present Day. November 2025. Today, Morrison's and Marcello's are both thriving. I've just signed a lease on a third location, a rooftop concept in Wicker Park that will feature globally inspired small plates and a craft cocktail program. It opens in February 2026. My father joined my board of advisors, offering legal and financial guidance without trying to control my decisions. My mother throws private events at Morrison's and brings her influential friends, who have become some of my best customers. Trevor refers business for dinners. Vivian is handling some of my investment strategy. My family, the one that once couldn't see past my failed law school career, now celebrates every milestone, every good review, every expansion plan. Giuseppe and Maria returned from Italy last month. Maria's treatment was successful, and they visited both restaurants. Giuseppe cried when he tasted the updated menu at Marcello's, where I'd kept his signature dishes but elevated them with modern techniques. "You didn't just save my restaurant," he told me. "You honored it. You understood that tradition and innovation aren't enemies, they're partners." Last week, I was invited to speak at Northwestern's business school, the same university where I dropped out of law school 3 years ago. I told the students about failure and courage, about building something from nothing, about trusting yourself when no one else does. Your parents will have opinions, society will have expectations, but the only person who has to live your life is you. Make it count. Make it yours. And if they call you just a waitress along the way, let them. You'll know the truth. Eventually, so will they.
Epilogue. The real lesson. People often ask me if I'm angry about the years my parents spent dismissing my choices, embarrassed by my career, minimizing my ambitions. The honest answer is no. Their doubt pushed me to prove myself, not to them, but to myself. Their skepticism taught me to be thorough, to be prepared, to have answers for every question. Their disappointment taught me that external validation is nice, but internal conviction is essential. Would it have been easier with their support from the beginning? Absolutely. But easy rarely builds character, and it never builds empires. I'm 23 years old. I own 3 restaurants, soon to be 4. I employ 47 people. I serve over 2,000 meals a week. I've been profiled by major media outlets and recognized as one of Chicago's most promising young entrepreneurs. But more importantly, I wake up every day excited about my work. I build something meaningful. I create experiences that bring people joy. I prove that success doesn't have a single definition, and that the path to achievement isn't always the one your parents planned. My name is Celeste Morrison. 3 years ago, I was just a waitress. Now, I'm just getting started.